Once, therefore, following the advice of Narada, he took shelter of Varuna and said to him, "My lord, I have no son. Would you kindly give me one?" Text 9 reads, "O King Parikshit, Harishchandra begged Varuna, 'My lord, if a son is born to me, with that son I shall perform a sacrifice for your satisfaction.' When Harishchandra said this, Varuna replied, 'Let it be so.' Because of Varuna's benediction, Harishchandra begot a son named Rohita." Text 10. Thereafter, when the son was born, Varuna approached Harishchandra and said, "Now you have a son. With this son you can offer me a sacrifice." In answer to this, Harishchandra said, "After 10 days have passed since an animal's birth, the animal becomes fit to be sacrificed." Text 11. After 10 days, Varuna again came and said to Harishchandra, "Now you can perform the sacrifice." Harishchandra replied, "When animal grows teeth, then it becomes pure enough to be sacrificed." Text 12. Translation. When the teeth grew, Varuna came and said to Harishchandra, "Now the animal has grown teeth and you can perform the sacrifice." Harishchandra replied, "When all its teeth have fallen out, then it will be fit for sacrifice." Text 13. Translation. When the teeth had fallen out, Varuna returned and said to Harishchandra, "Now the animal's teeth have fallen out, and you can perform the sacrifice." But Harishchandra replied, "When the animal's teeth grow in again, then he will be pure enough to be sacrificed." Text 14. When the teeth grew in again, Varuna came and said to Harishchandra, "Now you can perform the sacrifice." But Harishchandra then said, "O king, when the sacrificial animal becomes a Kshatriya and is able to shield himself to fight with the enemy, then he will be purified." Text 15. Harishchandra was certainly very much attached to his son. Because of this affection, he asked the demigod Varuna to wait. Thus Varuna waited and waited for the time to come. Translation. Text 16. Rohita, this is the son, Rohita could understand that his father intended to offer him as the animals for sacrifice. Therefore, just to save himself from death, he equipped himself with bows and arrows and went to the forest. Text 17. Translation. When Rohita heard that his father had been attacked by dropsy due to Varuna, and that his abdomen had grown very large, he wanted to return to the capital, but King Indra forbade him to do so. Text 18. King Indra advised Rohita to travel to different pilgrimage sites and holy places, for such activities are pious indeed. Following this instruction, Rohita went to the forest for 1 year. Text 19. In this way, at the end of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th years, when Rohita wanted to return to his capital, the king of heaven, Indra, approached him as an old Brahmana and forbade him to return, repeating the same words as in the previous year. Text 20. Thereafter, in the 6th year after wandering in the forest, Rohita returned to the capital of his father. He purchased from Ajigartha his second son, named Sunashepa. Then he offered Shunashepa to his father, Harishchandra, to be used as the sacrificial animal, and offered Harishchandra his respectful obeisances. Report. It appears that in those days a man could be purchased for any purpose. Harishchandra was in need of a person to sacrifice as the animal in a yajna, and thus fulfill his promise to Varuna. And a man was purchased from another man for this purpose. Millions of years ago, animal sacrifice and slave trade both existed. Indeed, they have existed since time immemorial. Text 21. Thereafter, the famous King Harishchandra, one of the exalted persons in history, performed grand sacrifices by sacrificing a man and pleasing all the demigods. In this way, his dropsy created by Varuna was cured. Let's not let this class get in the hands of the free organisms. Text 22. In that great human sacrifice, Vishwamitra was the chief priest to offer oblations. The perfectly self-realized Jamadagni had the responsibility for chanting the mantras from the Yajurveda. Vashishta was the chief Brahminical priest, and the sage Ayasya was the reciter of the hymns of the Samaveda. Text 23. King Indra, being very pleased with Harishchandra, offered him a gift of a golden chariot. Sunashepa's glories will be presented along with the description of the son of Vishwamitra. Text 24. The great sage Vishwamitra saw that Maharaj Harishchandra, along with his wife, was truthful, forbearing, and concerned with the essence. Thus he gave him imperishable knowledge for fulfillment of the human mission. Text 25 and 26. Maharaj Harishchandra first purified his mind, which was full of material enjoyment, by amalgamating it with the earth. Then he amalgamated the earth with water, the water with fire, the fire with the air, and the air with the sky. Thereafter he amalgamated the sky with the total material energy, and the total material energy with spiritual knowledge. This spiritual knowledge is realization of oneself as part of the Supreme Lord. And when the self-realized spirit soul is engaged in the service to the Lord, he is eternally imperceptible and inconceivable. Thus established in spiritual knowledge, he is completely freed from material bondage. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 9th canto, 7th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Descendants of King Mandhatta. Mukam karoti bachalam pangam nanayate girim yadkripa tadaham bande Sri Gurun Dinataranam. So this topic of human sacrifice, as presented here, may seem to some persons to be a bit disconcerting, a bit eerie, maybe even frightening, and they may have some doubts about the type of culture that this Srimad Bhagavatam knowledge has come from. They may think, well, if they were sacrificing human beings in those old days, that sounds pretty primitive, even demoniac. Hare Krishna. So how can we be sure that the knowledge presented here in Srimad Bhagavatam is free from any taint? So, but actually this human sacrifice or animal sacrifice as performed in ancient times, it was not like what we see in the movies. I remember seeing, when I was very small, some movies that would depict some Hollywood director's imagination of ancient civilization. And there would be priests sacrificing human beings, some bloody ritual. But actually, Vedic sacrifice, if it was done according to Vedic rules and regulations, with great brahmanas performing the rituals, then the spirit soul of that animal, or even animal-like human being, because this was the regulation, that if a human being was to be used in the sacrifice, then he had to be a bit slow in the mind, like an animal. And so when the ritual is performed properly, then the soul of this animal or animal man would be promoted to the abode of the demigods. In this case, to Indra, to Varuna. Varuna is the recipient demigod. So this means that that living entity who was sacrificed received great benefit. So it was to his betterment, to his good, that he was used in the sacrifice. Similarly, in Krishna consciousness, in devotional service or sacrifice to the service of the Supreme Lord, as Krishna himself explains in Bhagavad Gita, Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagnau Brahmanaputam Brahmaiva Tena Gantavya Brahma Karma Samarina. That all of the constituents or elements of sacrifice to the Supreme Lord, that means the thing that is offered, the offering, and the one who is doing the offering, and the actual performance itself, this all enters the Brahman, or transcendental atmosphere. In other words, everything becomes spiritualized. Everything becomes merged into the absolute, received, accepted by Sri Krishna. So, this is the greatest benefit. So, now, but Krishna does not accept such blood sacrifices. Actually, Krishna indicates in Bhagavad Gita that he's not interested in any type of what is called dravya yagya. Dravya yagya is the sacrifice of material things. It may be a human being, it may be an animal, or it may be any material thing. But if it is meant for material purpose, then it is not considered a very good kind of sacrifice. Krishna himself, he says in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Shreya dravya maya yagya jnana yagyena parantava. That better, Shreya means better than this dravya yagya, sacrifice of material things for material purpose, is jnana yagya, sacrifice made in knowledge. So, karma kila, sarva karma kila parta, jnana parisamiyate. The Lord concludes that actually this whole system of yagya, it is meant for coming to transcendental knowledge. That is the purpose of it. So, Krishna is the goal of all transcendental knowledge. He is transcendental knowledge itself. So, therefore, in Krishna consciousness, in devotional service, it is not the thing, the dravya, the item, which is offered, which is important. In worship of the demigods, it is simply a business, a matter of trading. You offer something material to the demigods and they give something material in return. But in Krishna consciousness, it is a matter of consciousness. It is a matter of offering in love and devotion. And this makes the offering acceptable to the Lord. So, yes, jnana yagya. The Lord says, jnana yagya. This is better. Offering made in knowledge. Knowing that I am the eternal servant of Krishna, and that this energy, this material world is simply meant for Krishna's service. So in that consciousness. And how to get this knowledge of proper performance of sacrifice? So Krishna, in the next verse, famous verse, in the 3rd chapter, Tad viri pranipatena pariprashnena sevya upadekshanti te jnanam. This one should approach spiritual master. Spiritual master means one who can instruct one in Krishna consciousness. Approach that spiritual master humbly, render service, offer questions. He can reveal this spiritual understanding, spiritual knowledge of what is sacrifice to the disciple. And then what is that knowledge? That knowledge is that all living entities are part and parcel of Krishna. So, as parts and parcels of Krishna, they are meant to be engaged in Krishna's service. So this is the actual proper sacrifice. Engaging living entities in Krishna, not cutting your heads off. There is some provision for that in the Vedic literatures. But that is for actually less intelligent persons who have material desires, and thus they're offering things to the demigods to receive things in return, material interaction. But when one comes to transcendental knowledge, then one understands all living entities as being parts and parcel of Krishna. They should be engaged in Krishna's service. So, for instance, in the Sankirtan yajna, this is what the devotees are doing, engaging the living entities in Krishna's service by distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. So this is proper yajna. And when the living entities are engaged in devotional service, then they come to transcendental knowledge. Evam prasana manaso bhagavat bhakti yogata bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. When one engages in devotional service, bhakti yoga, then the mind becomes peaceful. Evam prasana manaso. The mind becomes free of all material desires and disturbances. Like Maharaj Harishchandra, so desirous of a son, so he made such a pact with Varuna Dev. Give me a son and I will offer him to you in human sacrifice. So this is a disturbed mind. But evam prasana manaso, the mind becomes peaceful when it is engaged in devotional service, and one attains Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam, realization of the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Lord's personal glories. Mukta Sangasya Jayate, and he becomes freed from all material association. Now, we saw in reading these verses that was the ultimate benefit that Maharaj Harishchandra got. Because he was a follower of the Vedic culture, although he had material desires and he was engaged in demigod worship, still he got the association of such great souls as Vishwamitra Muni, Mukta Sangasya Jayate. In this way, by Sangha, Sadhu Sangha, Mahat Sevam Dvaram Hur Vimuktes. If one, somehow or other, even in the case of, as described here, he was engaged in human sacrifice. But somehow or other, while doing that, he got the association of Vishwamitra Muni, and Vishwamitra Muni became pleased with him and awarded him with transcendental knowledge, and thus he became free from material desires and attained the spiritual world. So Vishwamitra Muni himself, in his case too, he attained his position as being great sage also by good association with Vishishta Muni. Vishwamitra previously was Kshatriya, king named Gadi, or he had another name, Kaushika, indicating his dynasty, Kaushika. So he was once touring with the minister and his army, and they became hungry and thirsty. So they approached the ashram of Vishishta Muni. And Vishishta Muni welcomed them and invited them in. And because they were in need of food, and there was a great body of men there, the whole army, as well as the king and his minister. So Vishishta brought out Nandini, his Kamadhenu, his cow of benediction. Whatever is desired, such a cow, Kamadhenu, can provide. Eatables, anything. So in short order, this cow arranged for a complete sumptuous feast for the king, his minister, the whole army. Nice drinks, everything. Every need was provided for. So seeing this, Maharaj Gadi, he desired that cow. He was thinking, such an animal as this belongs in the how do you say, the quarter for storing animals. What is it called? Anyway. The Goshala. Yeah, that's okay. That's good. The king's Goshala. Yeah. Such an animal should be there. So he requested, Vashishta Muni, please give me this cow. Vashishta Muni said, well, I require this cow. I'm performing yajna, so this cow provides all necessities for yajna, so I don't like to give this to you. And besides, you should not request from a Brahmana his property. You're a Kshatriya, this is not proper. And then Vashishta said, Maharaj Gadi replied that, well, I'm a Kshatriya, you said I'm a Kshatriya, so my dharma is I take what I want. So if you don't give it, I'm going to take it. So then he began to pull on this cow. And the cow began to moo and bleat very piteously. And the cow took shelter of Vashishta Muni and said, Vashishta, aren't you going to save me? This horrible king is dragging me away. And Vashishta said, well, I'm a Brahmin. My dharma is to tolerate. So what can I do? If he's going to drag you, I can only tolerate this. But if you don't want to go, then you save yourself if you can. So when the cow heard that, then the cow became very angry towards this Gadi and manifested from her body all kinds of dangerous fighters, races of very fearsome warriors like the Mlechas and the Pallavas, that means the Iranians, because the Iranian royal dynasty is called the Pallava dynasty. So this is mentioned in Mahabharata, this word Pallava. They came from the cow's backside. And there was all kinds of others, like the Shabaras and the Simhalas. This means the people who live in Ceylon. The Simhalas. So these are all, and many others, all low class but very fierce, ferocious kinds of warriors. They jumped out of the body of the Kamadhenu. They began to attack the king and his army, and they outnumbered his army 7-1, and they drove his army back 20 miles. But they didn't kill any of them. So then when the army retreated, defeated, humiliated, wounded, then these demoniac soldiers withdrew and re-entered into the body of the cow. So Maharaj Gadi, seeing all this, he said, what is the use of being a Kshatriya? It's the Brahmins who have the real power. So I want to become like Vashishta. So it's a long story. We don't have to tell the whole story. But then Vishwamitra Muni became, or Gadi became inspired to perform austerities, and he became a great yogi and was known as Vishwamitra. He became as great as Vashishta, Brahma Rishi. So it's interesting because his initial motivation was one of, you might say, enviousness, but not really. It was not really nasty material enviousness. Rather, he was very much appreciating Vashishta Muni and his opulence of austerity. Austerity is the wealth of the Brahmins, and by their austerity they can accomplish anything. So he was very much appreciating. And because he was a Kshatriya, then it's his dharma, it's his nature to raise opposition when he sees the strength of another. Then it is simply his nature that he will try to oppose that strength and test it. And by this test he realized that Vashishta Muni's strength is like an ocean and mine is like a drop. So I should become like him. So in this way, by good association, he also became a great sage. So this is the point. Mahatsevam dvaram ahura vimuktes. Somehow or other, whether like this, out of competitive spirit, one gets association, or like Maharaj Harishchandra because he was performing a human sacrifice. But if one can get the association of a great soul, then he can get this knowledge that Sri Krishna is speaking of. And then engage in jnana yagya, sacrifice to the Supreme Lord in transcendental knowledge. And thus, this is the perfection of life. He goes beyond the external rituals, which are simply meant for satisfying material desires, and comes to the transcendental position. Now, Mahatsevam dvaram ahur vimuktes, then, tamo dvaram yoshita, sangi sangam. There's another kind of association, which is very detrimental. That is to associate yoshita sangha. Yoshita sangha means to associate with woman. This means, of course, to associate with woman for sense gratification. Also, it means to associate with men who are interested in women. Men who like women for sense gratification. So this word, yoshita, covers all. Just like men who are on the path of spiritual life, they should not associate with women for sense gratification. They should not associate with men who are interested in sense gratification. Similarly, women who are on the path of spiritual life should also not do the same. They should not associate with women who are interested in sense gratification, and certainly not with men who are interested in sense gratification. So it covers everything. So because if we have that kind of association, then tamo dvaram, this opens the door to hell. Even, sometimes some romantic desires arise in the mind. This can happen even in the Krishna consciousness movement. That we, as devotees, we serve the Lord together, and we naturally appreciate the qualities of other devotees, and we may also appreciate qualities of a devotee of the opposite sex, and think that he or she is a very nice devotee, and I also am attracted and would like to associate with this. So in this way, some romantic sort of desire, and we can convince ourselves that these are spiritual. We can convince ourselves that this is a spiritual interest, not a material interest. We have to be very, very careful about this. See, this association, it's a very subtle thing. Associating, we're doing. We're anyway associating. We're associating for spiritual purpose. We're all gathered here in this one room to see the deity, to hear the class. This is association. But in the mind, we are, because the mind is a place where we subtly taste different kinds of nectar. We should be tasting the spiritual nectar with the mind, but it's also certainly capable of tasting the material ras, prakrita ras. So if the mind is like a subtle tongue extending out of the head and trying to taste this prakrita ras, then that is the wrong kind of association. Even though there is no contact, even though that person that one is contemplating in a lusty way, that person themselves may be a very good devotee, may be completely innocent. But we have to be very careful about these minds. These minds can take a very auspicious thing and transform it to something inauspicious. There is a story of two brothers, Sunda and Upasunda. They were demons. They were twin brothers who were demons, and they were sons of one Nikumba, who was a demon coming in the line of Hiranyakashipu. So Sunda and Upasunda, twin brothers, they did everything together. They slept in the same bed, they ate from the same plate. Whatever one would enjoy, the other would enjoy. Everything, they wore the same clothes. They could not be separated. And they wanted to become very powerful. They wanted to conquer the whole universe. So they began performing austerities, following in the footsteps of their forefather, Hiranyakashipu. So they became yogis, and they went to the Vindhya hills in South India, and they stood on these hills, and they were not eating and not taking water, all the heavy austerities that Hiranyakashipu did, they did. And thus they began to disturb the whole universe by their fire to get this last benediction of immortality. So they whispered between themselves and they said, okay, then give us the benediction that we will not die at anybody's hand except each other. We'll only can be killed if we kill each other. Because they were thinking, we're so close. We're such intimate brothers. We do everything together. This will never happen. In this way we will live forever. So Brahma said, all right. That benediction I give you. So then they were very happy, and they, after receiving the benediction, they went down to the Asura Lokas, the planets of the demons, and they had a big party. They called all the demons together. They said, let's celebrate, we got our benediction. So they were drinking and eating and dancing and falling on their faces, and you could hear cries of, eat more, drink more, go on, go on. It was a long celebration. And then at the end of the celebration, the two brothers announced, so now, fellow demons, let's band together, make a great army, and attack those demigods and drive them out. Yes! Yes, all right. So everyone got their weapons. There was a huge army of demons. And because the demons are very envious, they don't often organize themselves like this. They need to have a very powerful leader. They don't often get such powerful leader. So this Sunda and Upasunda, they were very powerful, very worthy leaders. So the demoniac Kshatriyas, they had faith in them, and they banded together very powerfully, and they marched on the planets of the demigods and drove them out. And all the demigods had to retreat to the Brahmaloka. They were hiding there. So then Sunda and Upasunda, they had mastery over the Svargaloka as well as the earth planet. And then they were thinking that we've kicked the demigods out, but we have to make sure they never come back. So that means we have to kill all the brahmanas on the earth, because the brahmanas, they will perform yajna and they will make the demigods strong again, and the demigods will come back and attack us someday. So then they went to the earth and they began to pursue all the brahmanas all over the planet. First they came as in their original forms, as Sunda and Upasunda, and they ranged across the earth and they killed every brahmana they could find, every sage, every yogi. They killed them. And then after that tour, then they took the form of elephants. And then they again went across the earth, because the brahmanas who had escaped, then they came out and they started doing their yajnas and chanting the mantras. And then the elephants came through the forest and they saw the brahmanas and they attacked and killed them. And then the third time they came as tigers. And they came many times in different animal form. And so there were very few brahmanas left on the earth. And so in the Brahmaloka, the demigods and sages, they begged Lord Brahma, please, this universe is going to go completely dark if these two demons continue. We'll never have a chance of reviving our position. So then Brahma said, don't worry, this is all in my plan. So then Brahma, he assembled together from all over the universe all the beauty, all objects of, or the, shall we say, the essence of beauty from all beautiful things. And these essences appeared there in the form of jewels, very lustrous, beautiful jewels. And he assembled this crystalline essence of beauty into the shape. He had Vishvakarma actually. Vishvakarma was the master craftsman, master architect. He did the shaping of this jewel-like beauty into the form of a woman named Tilotama, which means the ultimate beauty. So this woman was simply magnificently beautiful. And when she made her appearance, Brahma told all the demigods that close your eyes. I have to send this woman down to the earth planet. But if you look at her, she may not be able to go. So the demigods were closing their eyes. Now, before I say this, I better explain. This happened in another day of Brahma, or shall we say another Manvantar. Every Manvantar, every period of Manu, there's a new Indra. So this was a previous Manvantar. So this is the story of how Indra got his 1,000 eyes. Because he closed his 2 eyes, but when Tilotama came by, many other eyes started to open all over his body just to see this woman. She was so attractive. And some of the demigods in this way, they were getting many heads because they were turning their head away, but another head would come here to look. So then Lord Brahma, he told, only Lord Brahma was unmoved by her beauty. So Lord Brahma told Tilotama, you go to the earth planet and you go to where Sunda and Upasunda are. And you just have to be there. You don't have to do anything. Just be there. So actually this Tilotama, she was a very saintly woman. She was not like a lusty apsara. She was very saintly, very pure-hearted woman. So she went down to earth because Brahma told her to go there, and she just was in the forest and was picking flowers. And picking flowers and singing Vedic hymns to herself. And but she was so magnificently beautiful that the word got back to the 2 demons. There's one woman like we have never seen before in the forest. So the demons immediately became interested. And they came to that forest. And when they saw her, then Sunda, he came on her right side and took her right hand. And Upasunda came on her left hand and took her left hand. And each one started to pull in the opposite direction. You're coming with me, you're my wife. No, you're my wife. And then they were looking at each other. Let her go! No, she's my wife and she's your guru. No, she's my wife and she's your sister-in-law. So they became very angry. And they took out their weapons and attacked each other and cut each other to pieces unless they were killed. And then Tilotama, she just innocently went back to the Brahmaloka. And Lord Brahma said, you have done very nice. So any benediction you want, you may take. And she said, I just want to serve you. Because she recognized that Lord Brahma, among all the demigods, he was free of lust. So she desired to just serve that person who would not trouble her in this way with lusty desires. So then Brahma agreed. So we see, here is illustrated, Tamo Dwaram, how the door to hell opened for this Sunda and Upasunda. Due to Asat Sangha or Stri Sangha. And it's not that the woman in question was reciprocating at all. It was simply their own minds which became uncontrolled and brought them destruction. So Mahatsevam dvara mahur vimuktesh. When we associate with saintly persons, with Vaishnavas, now this association means dedicating everything to their service. It does not just mean being in some proximity of distance. Associate means that you're in the same room with a Vaishnava. No, but it actually means dedicating oneself to the service of the Vaishnava and offering, especially this mind, to the lotus feet of the Vaishnava. This is association. If this association is simply formal, again, just this point of proximity, of distance, then what about this mind? If the mind is free to wander as it likes, then it will seek the asat sangha, the illusory association. So, anyway, this was the opportunity that Harishchandra got, association with Vishwamitra Muni, as a result of this endeavor to get a son and the sacrifice to Varuna, and thus he achieved the ultimate benediction of Krishna consciousness. Are there any questions?
Then the animal sacrifice, what is actually the satisfaction for the demigods? Is it that the soul goes to the demigods?
Yes. In the Rig Veda, the mantras are there. As the sacrifice is taking place, the Brahmins have to chant a mantra addressing the soul of the animal, that now you go to whatever, the planet of whatever demigod is the receiver. So the soul is lifted up and sent to the heavenly planet. And then this soul becomes engaged in the service of that demigod.
Sometimes it sounds like the demigods are dependent on Yagya or something. Is it like this?
Yes, it is like this. The demigods require the yagya offerings for nourishment. This is explained by Krishna in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that he has sent forth generations of men and demigods, and their desires coincide. The desires of demigods and men, they coincide in the process of yagya. So for the demigods to have their nourishment, their desires, to satisfy their desires, they require nourishment, and that they get through yagya. And when they get that, then they bestow all good things upon the human being. So when there's no yagya, then the demigods, they suffer.
But the yagya or the Sankirtan yagya, that is not direct towards the demigods, it's direct for Krishna. It has to act the demigods become strong.
But the demigods are the angas of Vishnu. The demigods are actually the senses of the universal form of Vishnu. And they're the Lord's devotees. The great demigods are all eternal devotees of the Lord. They appear in this universe as residents of upper planets, but these residents of the upper planets are actually expansions of prototype personalities who are eternal associates of the Supreme Lord. This is described in the Brahma Samhita and Srimad Bhagavatam in the 3rd canto. There are demigods who, before these demigods in the heavenly planets, there are more original demigods who are existing in the layers of the universe. These are the controllers of the elements. This is like original Lord Shiva or original Lord Brahma. And even these demigods, then they're expanded from associates of Mahavishnu. And then those demigods are actually ultimately expanded from personalities who reside eternally in the Goloka Vrindavan. So these are expansions of devotees. So as devotees, they are rejoicing that there is Sankirtan demigod. They're very happy.
The demigods, they are in charge of some functions in this material universe. For instance, without the Surya, there is no light, and without Varuna, there is no water or bodily function, or no breathing without Vayu. So, but when these demons, they take over this demigod's place, and the demigod, they flee away. So, how the things could they go on? The demons, they take charge of these things? Or?
Yes, sometimes the demons take charge. And this is experienced when the whole human society comes under demoniac influence. It means that they've placed themselves under the control of demons.
So the demon, they may take the position of Sangat and supply light, or the place of Varuna?
No, not those. They don't take the position of the principal demigods. The principal demigods, like the Lokapalikas who are guarding the directions, they may have to serve the demons. Just like Hiranyakashipu, when he took over the universe, then these demigods had to serve Hiranyakashipu.
But for instance, this raining is the function of Indra. The demons, they may take...
Yeah, they can take over the seat of Indra. That's happened quite a few times.
And then the demonic brahmanas, they made sacrifice towards these demons, and
maybe. Anyway, that doesn't go on very long. That's just a temporary setback for the demigods.
Previously in the third one it was mentioned that Vasishtha and Vishwamitra were fighting with the immune function process.
Yeah, well, they on the way of Vishwamitra Muni becoming a Brahma Rishi, there was a lot of fighting between those two. And even afterwards, then there was some lingering enmity. They're competitors. Once Vishwamitra Muni, he influenced one king to become a Rakshasa, and then that king ate the sons of Vasishtha. This was all under it was secretly done by Vishwamitra. It wasn't obvious. He was in an invisible form. So it seemed simply that the king had been cursed by a sage, and then had been cursed. The sage cursed him to become a Rakshasa. But the king was so powerful that he didn't have to. This is that story is in the 9th canto of the king who became a Rakshasa. But in the Mahabharata, there's some background information that it was all Vasishtha. Vishwamitra Muni was behind it. But this king, what was his name? Sodasha, I think. He got this curse, and so he was supposed to become, the spirit of a Rakshasa entered his body, but he could control this. He was such a great king. But then Vishwamitra Muni was following him around in an invisible form. And Vishwamitra Muni, then he inspired that Rakshasa spirit, made it stronger. So then the king couldn't control it, and he became a Rakshasa. And then in that invisible form, Vishwamitra led the Rakshasa king to where Vasishtha's sons were. And then he ate Vasishtha's sons. So, just to give trouble to Vishishta. Anyway, this is they have a relationship, those two. Yeah.
time, imagining it as a form of some animal, like scorpion or
Scorpio, what?
whatever. I mean, what we say, one should imagine some form of an envious animal.
Oh.
Yeah, something like this. And then repeat things to him. So if somebody is doing really, then it really tries to control the mind, it's just
Well, maybe it's helpful. I would imagine that depends on the person. Everybody has, in spiritual life, we all have a bit of, we're responsible. Ultimately, we're all responsible for our own spiritual advancement. We take help from Guru, we take help from Scripture, but it is up to us to put it into application. Nobody else can do that for us. It's not that we're just robots, but we have to ourselves dedicate our minds to the service of Krishna. So then in doing that, because we're responsible, we have a bit of leeway as to how to do it, the ways and means we can do it. So maybe for some such kind of meditation may be helpful. But actually to control the mind, you can imagine simply that the stick is the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And you just chant loudly. If the mind is giving you trouble, you just beat the mind with the Hare Krishna Mantra. Meaning you chant loudly, clearly, and you use the mantra to subdue the raging of the mind. I think this is the best thing to do. Imagining that the mind is a scorpion and beating it with a stick. That in itself sounds a little too mental to me. It's like already becoming too much absorbed in the mental plane. But at least we have to remember these instructions. So if you can remember by thinking like that the mind is like a dangerous scorpion, if that helps you to remember to take shelter of the holy name when the mind starts its nonsense, then that's good. Are there any other questions? Yeah?
What age children doing karma?
What?
I don't know.
Starting from what age the children may create karma for themselves?
According
I had
to...
here and it was 14 years. Now I'm obviously 5 years old.
Yeah, I've heard both statements. The age of 14 is mentioned in Mahabharata because this one sage, Mandavya Muni, when he was angry at Yamaraj, because he was arrested by the king's soldiers when some thieves, he was engaged in meditation, and some thieves came into his ashram with stolen goods, and they stashed the goods in his kutir, and they were hiding in his ashram, and then the soldiers came, and the soldiers asked the sage, "Have you seen some thieves?" And the sage, because he was observing Mauna, he did not answer. So then the soldiers searched, and they found the stolen goods in the sage's own house, and they found the thieves nearby. So then they thought he's part of the gang. So they arrested all the thieves and the sage too, and brought him to the king. And then that sage was pierced by a lance. They used to have this old way of punishing where they would stick a lance in the ground and drop the criminal on top of it. And he would hang there for many days until he died. This was also put to good use by the famous Dracula, who was a real person in history. He had the name, he was known as Vlad Dracul, means the son of Vlad, the son of Dracul. That's why it's called Dracula, son of Dracul. Dracul was his father. Dracul means the devil. So he came from a good lineage. And he was also known as Vlad Tepesh, and Tepesh means impaler, because he used to like to stick people on these sharpened points. He once completely demoralized the Turkish army. The Turks were invading from Bulgaria into Romania. And this Dracula, he attacked the Turkish army and captured some 20,000 soldiers. He was a very fierce fighter, so he captured these soldiers. And then he retreated with the Turkish soldiers. He retreated deeper into Romania, and so the rest of the Turkish army, they were in hot pursuit. And the first thing they noticed was that as Dracula was going along, retreating, he was poisoning all the wells and burning all the fields and slaughtering all the animals, so that the Turks had nothing. They had no supplies. And so they were becoming weaker and weaker. And then they came to a place where there was, they came to a forest of these spikes. There was a forest 3 miles wide and 1 mile deep. And those 20,000 Turkish soldiers were impaled on these spikes. So then the Turkish army started to march through this forest, and everywhere they saw their own men hanging and groaning and screaming. So then they became disheartened and they retreated. Went back. So this was an old pastime of kings. So similarly, Mandavya Muni, he was put on such a stake, such a spear. And he just continued his meditation and austerities on top of this spike. And the other thieves died, but he continued to live. He was not showing any distress. So finally the king came after a long time and saw that the yogi was still there, still engaged in his meditation. So the king had him brought down and said, "Please forgive me, I can understand that you must be a great soul and they have justly punished you." And then the sage said, I'm not disturbed with you at all, because you're not responsible. You think that you're the one who's administering punishment for people's sins, but you're not. It's actually Yamaraj. He does all this. So he's the one that I've got a problem with. So then he summoned Yamaraj. Yamaraj came and he said, "Yamaraj, why have you done this? Why was I destined to end up on this stake, although I have done nothing?" And Yamaraj said, "Well, when you were a little boy, you also stuck a sharp straw into the body of a bird." And then the sage said, "But I was only a few years old then. How you can hold me responsible for that?" After that time, I took up yoga, I became purified, I became realized in the absolute truth. So you have done wrong. So therefore he cursed Yamaraj, and that's how Vidura came into the world. Vidura was the incarnation of Yamaraj. So anyway, Mandavya Muni, then he declared at that time when he cursed Yamaraj that until a child is 14 years old, he's not responsible for his activities. Now the age of 5 is there because that's the age that a child should go into Gurukul. Because if the child is not trained beginning at the age of 5, then by the time the child is 14, he's going to be so materialistic in his mentality that when he reaches that age, then he will immediately begin to perform sinful activities. The age of 14 is the age of puberty. So if a child has not had training, when he comes to that time, then he will immediately become degraded. So that's why there's this mention of both ages. Are there any other questions? No? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.